The stagecoach rattled to a stop in front of the weathered ranch house, and Clara Hayes stepped down into the Montana dust with nothing but a worn carpetbag and a heart full of desperate hope. She'd traveled 1,800 miles to marry a man she'd never met, a rancher named Samuel Garrett who'd promised her a home, safety, and a fresh start from the shame that chased her out of Philadelphia. But the man waiting on that porch wasn't what she expected. Samuel stood 6 feet tall with shoulders that could carry the weight of the world. His face carved from granite and his eyes cold as the winter wind that swept down from the mountains. He didn't smile when he saw her, didn't offer his hand, just looked her up and down like she was a horse he wasn't sure he wanted to buy. "You're smaller than I expected," he said, his voice rough as gravel. "Can you work?" Clara's stomach twisted, but she lifted her chin. "Yes, sir. I can cook, clean, mend, and good. You'll earn your keep." He turned toward the house, then paused. "But don't expect more than that." As the sun began to set, painting the sky the color of blood and fire, Clara stood before the locked door of the ranch house, exhaustion pulling at every bone in her body. She'd worked all day, scrubbing floors, hauling water, cooking supper for a man who barely spoke 2 words to her. Now, as darkness crept across the prairie, she needed rest. "Mr. Garrett," she said quietly, Where will I sleep?" He didn't look at her, just kept oiling his saddle on the porch. "Figure it out." Her cheeks burned with humiliation. "I can sleep in the barn," she offered, hating how small her voice sounded. "I don't need much, just a corner somewhere." "No." The word hit her like a slap. Clara stared at him, confusion mixing with fear. "But I don't understand. If not the house, and not the barn, then where?" Samuel finally looked at her, and something flickered in those cold eyes, something she couldn't read. "You'll sleep where I tell you to sleep," he said. "When I'm ready to tell you." He walked into the house and locked the door behind him, leaving Clara standing alone in the gathering dark, wondering what kind of hell she'd just walked into, and what this silent, angry man was really planning for her. What Clara didn't know was that Samuel Garrett was guarding a secret darker than the Montana night. And before the week was through, that secret would either save her life or end it. 3 months earlier, Clara Hayes had been a different woman. She'd worn silk dresses and pearl earrings, attended society parties in Philadelphia, and believed her future was secure as the betrothed of Jonathan Whitmore, a promising young attorney from one of the city's finest families. Then came the night that destroyed everything. Jonathan's business partner, Marcus Bellamy, had cornered her in the library during an engagement party. His breath stank of whiskey, his hands were rough and unwanted, and when she'd fought back, when she'd pushed him away and he'd stumbled into a table, cutting his head, he'd spun a lie so convincing that even her own father had looked at her with disgust. "She came on to me," Marcus had claimed, blood running down his face. "When I rejected her, she attacked me like a wild animal." Jonathan had broken their engagement that very night. Her father, a man who valued reputation above all else, had given her 2 choices: marry a 60-year-old widower who'd overlook her indiscretion, or leave Philadelphia forever. Clara chose the third option, one her father hadn't offered. She'd found an advertisement in the back of a newspaper. "Rancher seeks wife. Must be hardworking and of good character. Montana territory. Write to Samuel Garrett, Wolf Creek Ranch." She'd lied in her letter, of course. Told him she was a simple girl from a simple family, looking for an honest life. Told him she could work hard and ask for little. Didn't mention the scandal, the broken engagement, or the fact that she was running from a lie that had become more real than the truth. Samuel's response had been brief. "Come, I'll pay your passage. Expect nothing fancy." And now here she was, standing in the cold Montana darkness, wondering if she'd escaped one nightmare only to walk into another. The wind picked up, carrying with it the scent of sage and something else, something wild and dangerous. Clara wrapped her shawl tighter around her shoulders and looked toward the barn. Through the gaps in the wooden slats, she could see the warm glow of a lantern. Someone was in there. Against Samuel's orders, against her better judgment, Clara walked toward that light. Her feet crunched on the dry grass, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled its lonely song to the rising moon. She pushed open the barn door slowly, half expecting Samuel to appear and drag her back to the house. But it wasn't Samuel inside. It was a woman. She sat in the corner of an empty stall, wrapped in a blanket, her face turned toward the wall. She was thin, too thin, with long dark hair that hung in tangles down her back. At the sound of Clara's footsteps, she went rigid, pressing herself deeper into the corner like a wounded animal trying to hide. "Please," Clara said softly. "I didn't mean to startle you. I didn't know anyone else was here." The woman didn't turn around. "You shouldn't be here," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "He'll be angry." "Who? Samuel? He's trying to protect you." The woman's shoulders shook, though whether from cold or fear, Clara couldn't tell. "You should go back. Sleep outside if you have to, but don't stay in the barn. Please." Clara took a step closer. "Who are you?" Finally, the woman turned, and Clara gasped. Her face was gaunt, her eyes hollow and haunted, but it was the bruises that made Clara's blood run cold. Purple and yellow marks that covered her neck and arms, some fresh, some fading. Marks that told a story of violence and terror. "My name is Margaret," she said quietly, "and I was the mail-order bride before you." The words hung in the air between them like a death sentence. Clara's mind raced, her heart hammering against her ribs. She thought of Samuel's cold eyes, his refusal to let her in the house, his cryptic warning about where she'd sleep. She thought of the locked door and the way he'd looked at her like she was something he needed to keep at a distance. Did he? Clara couldn't finish the question. "No," Margaret said quickly. "No, Samuel never hurt me. He saved me. But the man who did this," she pulled the blanket tighter around herself, "he's still out there. And he's coming back." Before Clara could respond, the barn door slammed open. Samuel stood in the doorway, his face carved from stone, his eyes blazing with an anger that made Clara's blood freeze in her veins. "I told you," he said, his voice deadly quiet, "not to come to the barn." And in that moment, Clara realized that whatever was happening at Wolf Creek Ranch, she just walked into the middle of a war. One where the casualties were women like her. Samuel grabbed Clara's arm, not roughly but firmly, and pulled her out of the barn. Margaret's face disappeared back into the shadows, and the door swung shut behind them with a finality that made Clara's stomach drop. "Let me go," she said, trying to pull away. But Samuel didn't release her until they were halfway back to the house, far enough from the barn that their voices wouldn't carry. When he finally let go, Clara stumbled backward, her fear transforming into anger. "You have a woman locked in your barn. A woman covered in bruises. What kind of monster?" "I'm the kind of monster who's keeping her alive." Samuel cut her off, his voice low and fierce. "The kind who's trying to keep you alive too, if you'd stop being foolish long enough to listen." Clara's breath came in short gasps. "Then explain it to me. Explain why you brought me here when you already had a wife." "She's not my wife." Samuel ran a hand through his dark hair, and for the first time, Clara saw something besides coldness in his eyes. She saw exhaustion. She saw fear. "Margaret answered my advertisement 8 months ago. She seemed kind, capable. I thought we could build something decent together." "What happened?" Samuel turned away, looking out at the dark mountains that surrounded his ranch like sleeping giants. 3 days after she arrived, a man showed up, called himself Silas Blackwood. Said he was a business associate from Denver, looking for a place to rest his horse. I gave him a meal, let him water his stock, sent him on his way. The wind picked up again, carrying with it the scent of coming rain. Samuel's jaw tightened. That night, I woke up to Margaret screaming. Blackwood had broken into the house. He had her by the throat, said she belonged to him, said she'd run away from Denver where he'd bought and paid for her from a brothel owner who'd held her debt. Samuel's hands curled into fists. I got him off her, ran him off my land, but he swore he'd be back. Said he'd kill any man who tried to keep what was his. Clara felt the anger drain out of her, replaced by a cold understanding. So Margaret's been hiding in your barn for 8 months? Not hiding, recovering. Samuel finally looked at her again, and Clara saw the weight he'd been carrying in every line of his face. I bought her passage to California, but she was too afraid to travel alone. Too afraid he'd find her on the road. So she stayed. Helped with the ranch work when she could. I kept advertising for another bride because... He paused, struggling with the words. Because I was lonely. Because I thought if I had a real wife, it might convince Blackwood that Margaret was nothing to me. That he'd leave her alone. That's the most foolish plan I've ever heard, Clara said. But there was no venom in her words now. I know. Samuel's laugh was bitter. But I'm a rancher, not a strategist. I just knew I couldn't send her away to die, and I couldn't kill Blackwood without proof of his crimes. So I tried to make it look like life was moving on. Like Margaret was just a hired hand who slept in the barn. Clara wrapped her arms around herself, her mind working through the implications. And then I showed up. And then you showed up, Samuel repeated. And I realized I'd made another terrible mistake. Because Blackwood's been watching. He has men in town who report back to him. By now, he knows there's a new woman at Wolf Creek Ranch. Which means I'm in danger too. Yes. Samuel's voice was heavy with guilt. I shouldn't have brought you here. I should have canceled the arrangement the moment Margaret told me Blackwood had been spotted in Wolf Creek last month. But I hoped, that if you came, if we acted like a normal married couple, he might finally believe Margaret means nothing to me and leave her be. Thunder rumbled in the distance. The storm was coming closer. That's why you wouldn't let me sleep in the barn, Clara said slowly. You weren't being cruel. You were keeping me away from her, so we wouldn't be connected. Fat lot of good that did, Samuel muttered. You found her anyway. Clara looked back at the barn, then at the dark house with its locked door. A choice crystallized in her mind, the kind of choice that would define what kind of woman she'd become in this harsh new land. Mr. Garrett, she said, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her veins. I didn't come to Montana to be protected. I came here to build a new life. And if that life includes helping a woman escape from a monster, then that's what I'll do. Samuel stared at her as the first drops of rain began to fall. You don't know what you're saying. I know exactly what I'm saying. Clara met his eyes without flinching. So stop trying to protect me, and start telling me the plan. The rain came down in sheets that night, turning the dry Montana earth into rivers of mud. Inside the ranch house, where Samuel had finally, reluctantly allowed Clara to enter. A fire crackled in the stone hearth while 3 people sat around a rough-hewn table, planning their survival. Margaret had been brought in from the barn. Her presence in the house a calculated risk that Samuel had argued against. But Clara had insisted. If Blackwood's watching, he already knows I'm here, Clara had reasoned. Hiding Margaret in the barn isn't protecting her anymore. It's just making her easier to isolate. Now, with hot coffee warming their hands and the storm raging outside, Margaret told her full story. She'd grown up in Iowa, the daughter of a farmer who'd lost everything to drought and debt. When she was 17, a smooth-talking man had offered her work in Denver, promised her a job as a seamstress in a fine dress shop. Instead, he'd sold her to Madame Rousseau's brothel, where her debt for passage and room had grown faster than she could ever hope to pay it. Silas Blackwood was one of the regulars, Margaret said, her voice flat with the kind of pain that had been lived with so long it had turned to numbness. But he didn't just want what the other men wanted. He became obsessed, started saying I belonged to him, that he'd buy my debt and take me away. How did you escape? Clara asked gently. I didn't. Not at first. Margaret's fingers trembled around her coffee cup. He did buy my debt, took me to a cabin outside Denver and kept me there for 3 months. But he was a businessman, traveled often for his mining investments. One day, while he was gone, I broke a window and ran. Stole a horse and rode until I couldn't ride anymore. When I saw Samuel's advertisement, I thought Montana was far enough. It should have been, Samuel said grimly. But Blackwood has money and connections. He tracked her somehow. Clara thought of her own flight from Philadelphia, her own belief that distance could erase the past. Men like that don't let go, she said quietly. They see people as possessions, especially women. Samuel stood and walked to the window, looking out at the storm. I sent word to the territorial marshal in Helena, told him everything. But Blackwood hasn't broken any Montana laws yet. Not that we can prove. The marshal said until he makes a move, there's nothing law can do. So we're just supposed to wait for him to attack? Clara's voice rose with frustration. No. Samuel turned back to them, and Clara saw something new in his expression. Not coldness now, but steel. We're supposed to be smart. Margaret leaves in 3 days. There's a wagon train heading to California, and I've arranged for her to travel with a family who'll watch over her. The Hendersons. Good people. 6 sons who know how to handle trouble. Margaret's eyes filled with tears. Samuel, I can't let you spend more money on me. You've already... I don't want to hear it. Samuel's voice was firm but kind. You're getting out of here and starting over. That's final. But what about you? Margaret looked at Clara. What about her? If Blackwood finds out I've left, he might take his anger out on me, Clara finished. I know. The room fell silent except for the drumming of rain on the roof. Clara thought about the choice before her. She could leave too, could take the first stage back to civilization and the uncertain future that awaited her there. Or she could stay, could stand beside this taciturn rancher who'd sacrificed so much for a stranger's safety. I'm staying, Clara said. You don't have to, Samuel began. But Clara cut him off. Yes, I do. Not because I'm brave. I'm not. But because running is what got me here in the first place. She thought of Marcus Bellamy's lies, of her father's cold rejection, of all the times she'd let other people define her worth. I'm tired of being afraid. I'm tired of letting men decide what happens to me. Samuel studied her face for a long moment. You understand what you're risking? I understand that if we let fear control us, people like Blackwood win. They keep winning. Clara looked at Margaret. We help her get free. Then we deal with whatever comes next. Margaret reached across the table and grasped Clara's hand. Thank you, she whispered. But their moment of solidarity was shattered by a sound that made all 3 of them freeze, the unmistakable crack of gunfire, followed by the splintering of wood. Samuel moved faster than Clara thought possible, grabbing his rifle from above the fireplace. Get down, he shouted. But his words were drowned out by another shot that shattered the window, sending glass exploding across the room. Through the broken window, carried on the wind and rain, came a voice that turned Margaret's face white with terror. Margaret, darling, I've come to take you home. Silas Blackwood had arrived. The next shot took out the lantern on the table, plunging the room into darkness lit only by the flickering fireplace. Clara hit the floor hard, her heart hammering so violently she thought it might burst from her chest. Beside her, Margaret let out a strangled sob that she quickly smothered with her hand. Stay down. Samuel's voice cut through the darkness. He'd positioned himself beside the shattered window, rifle ready, his body tense as a coiled spring. How many, do you think? He never works alone, Margaret whispered, her voice shaking. In Denver, he always had 2 men with him, brothers named Cole and Jesse Farrow. Another voice joined Blackwood's from somewhere in the darkness outside, rough and mocking. Come on, Garrett. Be reasonable. Just give us the girl and we'll be on our way. No need for anyone else to get hurt. Samuel didn't respond. Instead, he fired a shot into the darkness. Not at the voices, Clara realized, but above them. A warning shot. This is my land, Samuel shouted. You're trespassing. Leave now, and I won't press charges. Blackwood's laugh rang out, cold and cruel. Press charges? Oh, that's rich. Tell me, Garrett, have you pressed charges for theft? Because that's what Margaret is, stolen property. She owes a debt, and I've come to collect. Clara felt Margaret flinch beside her at the word property. and something hot and furious ignited in her chest. She'd heard men use that word before, had heard them talk about women like they were horses or furniture or investments. She'd promised herself she'd never let another man reduce her to less than human. "Margaret doesn't owe you anything," Clara shouted before she could stop herself. The resulting silence was somehow worse than the gunfire. Then Blackwood's voice came again, curious now, interested. Well, and who might you be, sweetheart?" "Don't answer him," Samuel hissed, but Clara ignored him. "I'm Samuel's wife," she called out, putting every ounce of steel she could muster into her voice. "And you're terrorizing my home. Leave now or face the consequences." Blackwood laughed again. His wife? Oh, this just gets better and better. "Tell me, Mrs. Garrett, do you know what kind of woman your husband's been sheltering? Do you know what she is?" "I know she's a human being with the right to her own freedom," Clara shot back. "Which is more than I can say for the kind of man who thinks he can own another person." "Damn it, Clara," Samuel started, but his words were cut off by a volley of gunfire that tore through the walls, sending splinters of wood flying through the air. Clara threw herself over Margaret, protecting the smaller woman with her own body as the house shook with the impact. When the shooting stopped, Clara's ears were ringing. She could taste dust and fear in her mouth, could feel Margaret trembling beneath her. "Samuel?" she called out. "I'm fine." His voice was tight with controlled fury. "But they've got us pinned." 3 men, like Margaret said. Blackwood at the front, 2 others flanking the sides. "What do we do?" Clara asked. Before Samuel could answer, a new sound cut through the night, the sound of breaking glass from the back of the house. Someone had gotten inside. Samuel spun around, bringing his rifle to bear on the doorway that led to the kitchen. "Take this," he said, pressing a revolver into Clara's hands. "You know how to use it?" Clara nodded, though her hands shook as she gripped the cold metal. Her father had taught her to shoot clay pigeons at their country estate. Gentleman's sport, he'd called it. She'd never imagined she'd be pointing a gun at another human being. Heavy footsteps moved through the kitchen. Whoever had broken in wasn't trying to be quiet anymore. They wanted to be heard, wanted to spread fear. "Jessie, check the bedrooms." Blackwood's voice called from outside. "Cole, watch the barn. Make sure she doesn't have any other surprises waiting." The footsteps came closer. Margaret's breathing had gone shallow and rapid, the sound of someone on the verge of panic. Clara reached out with her free hand and found Margaret's fingers, squeezing tight. "Whatever happens," Clara whispered, "we face it together." A shadow appeared in the doorway, a large man with a scarred face and a gun in each hand. He smiled when he saw the 3 of them huddled on the floor, smiled like a wolf that had just found cornered prey. "Well now," Jesse Farrow said, his voice a lazy drawl. "Ain't this cozy?" Samuel raised his rifle, but Jesse was faster. His shot went wide, deliberately, Clara realized. He wasn't trying to kill them. Not yet. "Boss," Jesse called out. "I got 'em. All 3. Just like you wanted." And through the broken window, riding toward the house on a black horse like some demon from a nightmare, came Silas Blackwood, come to claim what he believed was his. Time seemed to slow down in that moment between heartbeats. Clara saw Samuel's finger tighten on the trigger, saw Jesse Farrow's gun swing toward them, saw Margaret's face, frozen in the terror of someone watching their worst nightmare made flesh. Then Clara did something that surprised even herself. She stood up. "Don't!" Margaret grabbed at her skirt, but Clara pulled free, keeping the revolver pointed at the floor but visible in her hand. She stepped forward, placing herself between Jesse Farrow and the others. "You want her," Clara said, her voice surprisingly steady. "Then you'll have to go through me first." Jesse blinked, clearly not expecting this response. Behind him, Clara could hear Blackwood dismounting, his boots hitting the porch with heavy thuds. "Ma'am," Jesse said slowly, "you don't want to do this. Boss doesn't like it when people get in his way." "I don't particularly care what your boss likes." Clara took another step forward. In her peripheral vision, she could see Samuel rising slowly to his feet, using her distraction to reposition. What I care about is that you're in my home, threatening my family. Your family? Blackwood's voice came from the doorway, and Clara forced herself not to turn, not to take her eyes off Jesse. Your family is harboring a thief and a runaway. You're protecting a woman who owes me $5,000 in debt and damages. Damages? Clara couldn't keep the disgust from her voice. You mean the cost of the window she broke to escape your prison? Blackwood stepped fully into the room, and Clara finally let herself look at him. He was handsome in a polished, dangerous way, well-dressed, with dark hair slicked back and a smile that probably charmed society women and business partners alike. But his eyes were dead, cold as a snake's. I mean, Blackwood said softly, the cost of investing in her future, the money I spent buying her debt, providing her with shelter and— You kidnapped her, Clara interrupted. You held her prisoner. You beat her. Those aren't investments, Mr. Blackwood. Those are crimes. Something flickered in Blackwood's expression. Surprise, perhaps, that this strange woman knew his name, knew Margaret's story. He recovered quickly, his smile widening. And who are you to make such accusations? Some jumped-up mail-order bride playing at being a lady? He looked Clara up and down with an expression that made her skin crawl. Though I must say, Garrett, you did better with this one. She's got spirit. She's got a gun, Samuel said flatly. His rifle now pointed directly at Blackwood's chest. And I suggest you remember that before you say another word about my wife. The word wife hung in the air, and Clara felt something shift in the room, some subtle change in the balance of power. She and Samuel weren't truly married, of course. The arrangement had been for convenience, for survival. But in that moment, with enemies at their door and violence crackling in the air like electricity before a lightning strike, the lie became something more real than any ceremony could have made it. Your wife, Blackwood repeated, his eyes narrowing. Is that so? And when exactly did this marriage take place? Today? This afternoon? Perhaps? When my sources told me she just arrived on the stage. Clara felt her heart skip. He'd been watching that closely? We were married by proxy 2 weeks ago, Samuel lied smoothly. Clara came to make the arrangement permanent. I have the papers if you'd like to see them. I'm sure you do. Blackwood's smile turned cruel. Just like I'm sure Margaret has papers saying she's a free woman. Funny how easy it is to forge documents out here in the wilderness. Isn't it? No one to verify, no one to check. The territorial marshal has copies of everything, Clara said, suddenly understanding Samuel's earlier mention of contacting Helena, including Margaret's testimony about what you did to her in Denver, including the names of witnesses who saw her injuries. It was a bluff. Clara had no idea what documentation Samuel actually had, but it landed. She saw Blackwood's jaw tighten, saw his hand drift toward the gun at his hip. You're making a mistake, Blackwood said, his voice dropping to something dangerous and dark. Both of you. I came here to reclaim my property peacefully. I'm a reasonable man. I'm prepared to offer compensation for the trouble. She's not property. The words burst from Clara with all the fury of every injustice she'd ever suffered. Every time she'd been treated as less than human. She's a person. A human being with rights and dignity, and she's nothing. Blackwood's composure finally cracked, his face twisting with rage. She's a whore who thought she could run from her debts. And you? He jabbed a finger at Clara. You're a fool if you think you can stop me from taking what's mine. He reached for his gun, and the room exploded into chaos. Samuel's rifle fired. Jesse's guns fired. Clara pulled the trigger of the revolver, the recoil slamming up her arm. The sound was deafening, the gun smoke choking. When the echoes faded, someone was on the floor, and everything had changed forever. The figure on the floor was Jesse Farrow. Samuel's shot had taken him in the shoulder, sending his own shots wild. Clara's bullet had missed entirely. She'd closed her eyes when she fired, a mistake that could have been fatal. But the combined gunfire had been enough to send Jesse stumbling backward, his guns clattering to the floor. Blackwood had frozen, his own gun half drawn. His eyes wide with the sudden realization that this wasn't going to go the way he'd planned. Outside, Clara could hear Cole Farrow shouting, confused and alarmed by the sound of shots from inside the house. "It's over, Blackwood." Samuel's voice was deadly calm. His rifle now pointed directly at the man's head. "Your man is down. You're outnumbered. And by now, every rancher within 5 miles has heard the gunfire and is riding this way." It was another bluff, but a good one. In Montana Territory, the sound of sustained gunfire brought neighbors running. It was an unspoken code of the frontier. Help your own, or next time no one would help you. Blackwood's face went through a series of expressions: rage, calculation, and finally something that might have been grudging respect. "You've thought this through," he said. "I've had 8 months to think it through," Samuel replied. "Jesse!" Cole's voice came from outside. "Boss, what's happening?" Blackwood's eyes never left Samuel's rifle. "Stand down, Cole," he called out. "We're leaving." "But boss," "I said stand down." Blackwood's voice cracked like a whip. Slowly, carefully, he raised his hands away from his gun. "Jesse, get up. We're going." Jesse struggled to his feet, clutching his bleeding shoulder, his face pale with pain and shock. He stumbled toward the door, never taking his eyes off Samuel. Blackwood backed toward the doorway, his movements slow and deliberate. But before he left, he looked at Margaret. Really looked at her for the first time since entering the house. What Clara saw in his eyes then wasn't love or even obsession. It was ownership thwarted, pride wounded. He'd never cared about Margaret as a person. She'd just been something he wanted, and no one told Silas Blackwood he couldn't have what he wanted. "This isn't over," he said quietly. "Yes," Margaret said, her voice stronger than Clara had ever heard it. "It is." She stood up, walked over to where Clara stood, and took her hand. Then she looked at Blackwood with eyes that were no longer full of fear, but of something harder, something forged in the fire of survival. "I'm not your property," Margaret said. "I never was. And if you come back here, if you ever try to harm me or these people again, I will testify against you in every court in this territory. I will tell everyone what you did, who you really are. And I promise you, Silas, your reputation, your business, your standing in Denver society, it will all burn to ashes." For a moment, Blackwood looked like he might laugh. Then he looked at the 3 of them standing together. Samuel with his rifle, Clara with her revolver, Margaret with her newfound courage, and something in his expression changed. He'd lost, and he knew it. "You'll regret this," he said, but the words had no power behind them anymore. "No," Clara said. "I don't think we will." Blackwood left then, collecting his injured man and riding off into what remained of the storm. They heard the hoofbeats fade into the distance, heard Cole Farrow cursing as they retreated toward the mountains. When they were truly gone, Clara's legs gave out. She sat down hard on the floor, the revolver falling from her trembling fingers. The adrenaline that had been holding her together drained away all at once, leaving her shaking and cold. Samuel knelt beside her, his hand gentle on her shoulder. "You did good," he said quietly. "You were incredibly brave, and incredibly foolish, and probably saved all our lives." "I didn't know what else to do," Clara admitted, her voice shaking. I couldn't let him take her. I couldn't." Margaret sat down on Clara's other side, and the 3 of them stayed there on the floor of the shot-up house as the storm finally began to break outside. Through the shattered window, Clara could see the first hints of dawn painting the eastern sky, pink and gold and full of promise. "What happens now?" Margaret asked. Samuel looked at Clara, then at Margaret, then at the ruined house around them. A slow smile crossed his face, the first real smile Clara had seen from him. "Now," he said, "we rebuild. Together." And in that moment, Clara realized that she'd found what she'd been looking for all along. Not safety, not escape, but something more valuable. A place where she belonged. A place worth fighting for. A home. 3 months later, Clara stood on the porch of the rebuilt ranch house, watching the sun set over the Montana mountains. The house had new windows now, glass that sparkled in the fading light. The bullet holes in the walls had been patched and painted over. And in the barn that had once been Margaret's prison of fear, A new horse stomped and whinnied, adjusting to its new home. Margaret was gone, safely traveling with the Henderson family to California. She'd written twice already, letters full of hope and plans for the future. She'd found work with a seamstress in Sacramento, was learning to trust again, to live without fear. Samuel came up behind Clara, slipping an arm around her waist. It was a gesture that had become natural over the past weeks, comfort freely given and received. Their marriage of convenience had transformed into something neither of them had expected: partnership, respect, and the slow, steady growth of something that might become love. "Thinking about her?" Samuel asked. "Thinking about all of us," Clara admitted. "About how different things could have been if you'd turned her away that first night. If you hadn't cared about a stranger's safety. If you hadn't had the courage to stay," Samuel added. "If you hadn't stood up to Blackwood." Clara leaned into his warmth. "Do you think he'll come back?" "No." Samuel sounded certain. "Men like that are cowards at heart. They only fight battles they're sure they can win. We proved we weren't going to roll over, and that was enough." Clara hoped he was right. But even if Blackwood did return, she knew they'd face him together, just as they'd rebuilt the house together, worked the ranch together, learned to trust each other through shared struggle and shared triumph. "I never thanked you," Samuel said quietly, "for not sleeping in the barn that night, for being stubborn enough to find Margaret, brave enough to stand with us." Clara turned in his arms and looked up at him. "I never thanked you," she said, "for locking the door, for forcing me to find another way, for giving me a reason to fight instead of just a place to hide." Samuel smiled, that real, genuine smile that transformed his entire face, and kissed her forehead. "Welcome home, Clara Garrett," he said, and as the Montana sunset painted the sky in shades of fire and gold, Clara knew she was exactly where she was meant to be.